This is kind of scary and exciting all at the same time.
Awesome. Okay, well, welcome everybody to Rich Hannah's speaking session. So first things first, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Bailey. I am a customer success manager here at StuKent. We do have our chat section over on the far right-hand side of your screen. Rich is going to use that periodically in his breakout session, so be sure to chat in there. And also, one thing to mention is that the most active person in the chat will receive a $5 gift card today, and we will be announcing that at the end of the speaking session. So just to introduce Rich a little bit, Rich Hannah is a member of the marketing division at Babson College. His areas of expertise include digital marketing, social media, email, information transparency, and digital analytics, and sales and analytics. His research has appeared in a variety of scholarly journals, and he has co-authored 2 books, Email Marketing in a Digital World, and Internet Marketing, Research Customers Anytime, Anywhere, Any Platform. Rich has also consulted for several other firms, including StuKent, Verizon Foundation, the Maids franchise, Wachusett Mountain, HSBC, Federal Realty, and Northeast Utilities, just to name a few. Prior to academia, he worked in marketing research consulting, B2B sales, and marketing communications. So have fun, guys.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I was tempted to name this presentation Pants Only. Or, I mean, no pants required, but obviously it's don't forget the email, teaching email marketing and making it fun. So email marketing is something that's near and dear to my heart. When I actually went back to school, I came from a sales background, and digital marketing was really called e-commerce at the time. And a lot of the focus when I was a student was on how to use email, and that became part of my dissertation. So it's kept a near and dear place to my heart, and I always include it in every digital marketing class I teach. But I know that when I first started teaching it, it was really a struggle. Students just did not get very excited about it. So over time, I've developed a few different tricks that I think work. We'll see. Maybe you can give me your opinion and see if you think they work too. So my plan today is to the agenda. I don't know if you guys can see that; it's blank on my screen, but to talk about how I approach teaching, my general teaching philosophy, and then understand why students think email marketing is tough, and then or why it's tough to get them to like email marketing, and then 5 ways that I've worked on to jazz it up. And you don't have to use all 5, but hopefully different ideas. One of them you'll at least like, and then just close with some implementation ideas and some final thoughts. So my teaching philosophy is that I believe, and the research shows, that students come to any situation with some pre-existing knowledge, and some of it's relevant and some of it, well, not so much. So I like to try to understand students' roadblocks and try to provide structure for their new learning, and then build off of those things along with students' actual experiences to hopefully make the material more relevant. And so as we go through some of my ideas I'm going to share with you today, hopefully you'll see how it comes back to this. So let's talk about what makes tough. What's so tough about email or teaching email? First, part of the problem is that we all get a lot of it. This is my email box. As you can see, across 3 email accounts, I have about 14,000 unopened emails. And every once in a while I try to delete them, and it winds up taking me longer to do that than just to simply give up and leave it. But the idea here is that we all deal with a lot of emails every day, and it doesn't go away. As you can see in my iPhone, almost all of them are chasing me on my iPhone too. And I'm fairly certain I'm not the only one who's like this. And I know our students are a lot like this too. Now, unless you're into productivity, activities like getting things done or getting emails to 0, you're probably a lot like this too. Also, the other thing is, with getting so many emails, it gives people the impression that they're already an expert. I've seen every email possible. I know it all. Oh, emails are so boring. I hate getting them. I don't want to learn how to use them. And so ultimately, it's just all of this can drive us all crazy. So with that in mind, I've tried to come up with 5 ideas to try to put some fun into email and to connect email marketing with marketing strategy, and also align this with individuals' own experiences, and push the students to do something real and apply those extra emails that are sitting in their mailbox to something good. So, 5 ways that I've come up with. I'm going to start talk a little bit about historical trivia that I use to try and get people laughing and exciting about email. Then talk about some exercises, an email accounting exercise, a look at my email promotion exercise, build a workflow, and experiments and A/B tests. So there's some quantitative in there for those of you who want to get some quantitative activity into email marketing. So let's talk about, these are the 5 questions that I start out with every time I talk about email marketing. The first, so they are: when was the first electronic message? Who created email? Which head of state sent the first email? What is the origin of spam? And when did email die? So we'll go through each of these very briefly. So let me ask you guys, if you use the chat, when do you think was the first electronic message? What year? So I'll give you guys a couple of seconds to enter in some years in the chat. And we'll give a no prize award at the end. If you're a comic book fan, you know that a no prize award is when you find an error in the comic book and then you send it to the editor and they post it, and all you get is the recognition for having found the right, finding an error, but there's no actual prize. So the no prize award is to anybody who can come up with the actual year. Good, I see some years strolling in. Give it a couple more seconds before I give it away. There, I've given it away. Technically, you could say the first email message or electronic message was 1844 with the telegraph and sending Morse code. In fact, Samuel Morse sending the first Morse code at that time from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. Of course, this is going to make most students angry because no one would ever think about the telegraph being an electronic message. So most of you are entering in dates in the 1960s, and that's about right. The actual date is 1969. A message between UCLA and the Stanford Research Institute, which was an institute that was sponsored or created by Stanford University. And the funny thing was that this message never even completely got through. But this was after years of effort of trying to make 2 computers speak to each other across a large distance. Now, over time, this, of course, got better. The point of this exercise is to show 2 things. One, that what we classify as an electronic message is going to vary. Email, we just assume, well, email, we know what that looks like. But the reality is email started out a lot like a text message. And as we'll talk about later, when email dead or not, and our text messaging and text bots and things going to take over for email, it's an interesting way to spark that conversation either right away or even have it as a tease for something you want to do later. Okay, the next question. Who created email? If you want, okay, a few people have already thrown in some answers, and so this is actually a little bit of a trick question or a tough question because there's a lot of people who are involved in the process of getting us to where we have email. But there's one person that is truly considered the father of email for one very good reason, and I'll explain in a moment. And then there's another person who's laid a claim on email. You guys ready for the answer? All right, the answer is, well, most people would argue that Ray Tomlinson is the father of email. And he's the father of email because he provided a lot of code and protocols to the process of creating emails. But the one thing that he's tied to especially is that he's the one who created the use of the @ symbol in our emails. Now, this gentleman on the left here, his name is Shiva Ayyadurai. He, at age 14, around 1978, created an email system for a hospital in New Jersey. This email system, you can imagine it being a lot like one of the early versions of Eudora or even Mail or Outlook that didn't exist at this time. But it was an internal email system for this hospital. Now, what he did, though, was he trademarked or copyrighted the term email shortly thereafter, which is partly his later claim. And so you've got this massive debate going on between the techies of the 70s, who are the MIT and RPI guys who side on Ray's side. And then you get a lot of younger people who are arguing that Shiva's the one. I would fall on the Ray side of this argument, but it's an interesting debate, and it's a way that you can sort of make email marketing interesting, is that people are fighting over things, and you could even add some cartoon captions to that. One thing, a little trivia note: Shiva is also a Massachusetts resident. Can't speak today. And one other claim to fame is that for a couple of years he was linked to Fran Drescher, also known as Fran the Nanny. Maybe that's dating myself. All right. The next question, which head of state sent the first email? Any thoughts on that in the chat? Well, if you said the Queen of England, then you were correct. In 1976, Queen Elizabeth was the first head of state to send an email. Now, actually, I can't tie this into anything else that's involved in marketing. I just think this is a fun fact that I throw in just for giggles. All right. Now, this is one that's my favorite. What is the origin of spam? And feel free to add this to your chat as well if you have an idea of where we got spam from, or the name for spam for junk mail. All right. I'll tell you. If you said you think it's actually spam the ham, you're actually only half right. So we are using the name in reference to this, but this is not why we call junk email spam. In fact, the answer lies with Monty Python. So if you're a Monty Python fan like myself, you can thank them for why we call junk mail spam. So I have a link here that you can copy, and we can also send it out. But this link brings you to a page that will explain email and spam. But Monty Python did this skit many years ago in the late 60s where these two people go into a diner to order breakfast, and every item on the menu has spam in it. So spam and eggs, omelet with spam, eggs with spam with a side of spam, and a topping of spam, and everything's spam. And the woman who's ordering says, "I don't want spam. I don't like spam." And the Vikings are in the scene. If you notice, they're Vikings. All start chanting spam, 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 spamity spam. And I'm sure this is very interesting on a distance presentation. But anyways, ultimately later, when people were using message boards or playing games online, as you can see the message board to the right, if they didn't like a comment or didn't want a comment to appear, they would type spam in capitals all through the message board until the unwanted message disappeared. Eventually, though, that became even unwanted. So typing in spam was basically a signal of, we don't want this. And eventually later got tied to, well, unwanted email. So it's a great history there. And if you can play the video, that's another fun thing you can do for your students and connect some old comedy to this whole thing. Now, I also then tie this to the definition of the CAN-SPAM Act, because most people think that there's actually heavy-duty rules against junk mail, and there really isn't. And I also, just because of kind of crazy sense of humor, I just love telling people what CAN-SPAM stands for. So the CAN-SPAM Act of 2003 stands for, it's an acronym for Controlling the Assault of Non-Solicited Pornography in Marketing. And really, it came about because most of the unwanted email in the late 90s was people sending pornography. But it's important to go over these 7 things, because what helps you tie to how should you design an email, how important is the subject line relative to the content, the who's it's coming from, and things like that. So that's a really kind of fun way to say, well, this is why we do these things. And those are somewhat boring topics. At the same time, it's also important to point out how this act has no teeth, that to actually prove that someone is violating these is actually difficult, and the payoff isn't great. So a lot of people don't sue over the Spam Act. All right, and the last question is, when did email die? And hopefully you know the answer is that, well, email has not dead. But this has been a conversation that comes back and forth. For example, there was a point in time where everybody thought the postage service would die because of email. Well, it might, but not necessarily because of email. There's a lot of other reasons that could drive that. But email was associated with the termination of traditional mail. But then with the launch of the phone, the smartphones, and social media, there was a lot of conversation that email was going to die thanks to social media. And now these conversations start to happen again as we talk about chatbots and messaging apps, Slack, and the things like that. But this is a good way to motivate a conversation around, well, what is email good for? You know, what things can you communicate on email that you really can't communicate on text? And so you can have a conversation around those activities, like, yeah, I want to get someone's attention or get a quick answer with a text, but I really have to explain something. No one wants to see a whole long, lengthy text message, right? So, you know, thinking about when is it appropriate for email, and then also trust issues. If some company suddenly sends you a text message out of the blue, do you really want that? I mean, to some extent, we want that if it's to service like I like it if a hotel texts me saying my room is ready, or that my bank would text me and say there's a problem, because I want to act on those right away. But I'm not sure I want to receive marketing messages via my text messaging. And so email is clearly not going to go away. And to quote, when I was working on the email book, to quote an executive I spoke to who was in email marketing, he said, email marketing is like a license to print money. The return on your investment is so high if you do it right. It's incredible. So email is clearly not going anywhere. All right, so we need some activities, especially now that we're moving a lot of stuff into blended formats or flipped classrooms. And so, I think going over the trivia is a nice way to introduce email marketing, and that could be done via face-to-face, or that could be done in an asynchronous presentation or online. But these next four are actual activities that students can do, or you can do with the students, or do it yourself and then present. A variety of ways you can deliver it, but just different ways to get people involved in the act of understanding their email. So the first is what I call email accounting. The goal is to have students evaluate their own emails for a day. And this is going to be difficult. It's actually a lot more difficult than it sounds, especially if you're trying to document it in a spreadsheet, because ultimately you want to identify how many emails did you get by type. So how many emails did I get from my school? How many emails did I get that were promotions? How many were friends, and so on. And so, it's a little bit more complicated than it sounds, but at the same time, it's very illuminating to figure out just who exactly sends you emails on a daily basis and how many you're getting. And then the next thing is which ones did you open and which ones did you just delete like that? And just assess, why did you delete it like that? Which ones did you open? And the goal is to get people towards what's the best email they receive and what's the worst email they receive outside of just communication with friends. Now, you could extend this by then challenging folks to create the best promotional email based on all the different emails they've got. So this could be a week-long process, or this could be a single class, a lot of different ways. You don't even have to go to that last one. It really depends on how you want to play with this. But it gets people to appreciate a little bit more about what's in their email box and what they like and dislike. And also, Scott Cowley made a great presentation yesterday. You probably could adapt his Hero, Hub, and Help model and have students classify their emails along those three categories. So check out his presentation if you missed it. All right, the next one is one of my favorites. I've been doing this one for a while. It's look at my email promotions. This is where I get to show off all the emails I've been ignoring for years or months or however long. And so you can actually challenge students to do this on their own, or you could do this with your own email and then present it as a lecture to way to target or to discuss blast emails versus targeted emails and drip campaigns. So the goal is to show the impact of a daily email versus a blasted email. And the way you can do this is just pick one vendor that sends you emails frequently and one that you would probably make a purchase from. Screenshot their daily emails for 30 days. And you may find that they're sending you 2 a day, and that can be alarming in itself. But the most important part is to then summarize what's going on across these emails in a spreadsheet where you want the subject line and the offer and the date, and then you can share and comment. So I'll give you an example of what I went through with my students. I chose Banana Republic. This is when I used to fit into Banana Republic. Today, luckily this coat fits in my new ProfCon shirt. But Banana Republic still sends me emails daily, and I just haven't had the heart to unsubscribe because I'm either a glutton for punishment or I'm just curious. But this is from a few years back. And so I started on May 10th, and I was showing the emails that I was receiving, and so I'd pop up, a few at a time in a PowerPoint. And this was just to show that, well, they started out by sending me information about their clothes, what's new in their clothing line, and then it ends with a discount. So the typical inform, promote kind of strategy. Well, then I noted that a couple of days later, they started sending me emails for women's clothes. And I make the joke, well, either they think I'm a girl now, or they don't really know who I am, and they're just, doing the best they can. Hey, let's see what sticks. Respond to one of them. Obviously, that's probably not the case. Then, as we move along, we start to see more and more discounts. And so the two in the bottom on the left show 35% and then 40%. They're for different clothing. But if you're not paying attention, you just see, one day they offer me 35% off, another 40%. A few days later, they try to play with curiosity and say, oh, not curiosity. This is sorry. This is the one where they say if urgency, which is also near and dear to my heart as a sales guy. Oh, act today, you get 35% off. But if you wait till tomorrow, 30% off. And the next day, of course, they say, ha ha. They probably don't do the Simpsons laugh, but nonetheless, 30% off. And so you missed it. And then my sort of the end of this is that in this particular story, I happened to make a purchase from Banana Republic of over about $200 worth of clothes. This is getting ready for summer or spring, end of spring, summer kind of stuff. And I make the point that on May 27th, I made a purchase, but on the next day, I get another offer. And this is where they try to do curiosity, where they don't even tell you what the discount is. You have to click on it, do a click through to actually get to the discount. And so this is funny to me because I ask the students now, well, what email should they have sent? Is this the right time to send me a promotion? Really, shouldn't they have just said, thank you? Or give me a promotion that I can use some time from now? But to try to get me to buy the next day after I just made a major purchase. And this ultimately leads to the conversation where a lot of companies, the marketing side of the house, which is sending out the daily blast, is not connected to the other side of the house that contains all the behavioral data of have you made a purchase. Also, I made this purchase in store as opposed to online, and that could be an added issue. So there's a few opportunities here to connect the infrastructure of email and companies and how these things work to just the very nature of the emails that you're getting every day. Then, for me, the fun part is ultimately the spreadsheet, because I like to say the spreadsheet never lies. And so as you can see in the spreadsheet, across the 20 days or so that I was documenting this, you see the, the different subject lines, and more importantly, you see the discounts, which I've circled on the side here. And now you can have a conversation about pricing strategy or promotional strategy and say, what does this do for the brand value that everything is constantly on discount? Now, granted, this is the nature of retail. There's a lot of things on discount all the time, so you have to couch it into that. But still, the point is that this company is continuously offering you 30 to 40% off. And so why would you ever pay full price for anything knowing that waiting one day is going to create a discount the next? And so it brings in a lot of different things you can bring to bear from a promotional perspective in terms of the devaluing of price with over discounting, the behavior that we train into our customers with the frequent emails, and then the potential, having people shut the messaging out because they're so used to seeing it every day. All right, this is a new one. I literally just tried this in the last week, so I don't have a lot of data to support whether this is a good idea or not. I'm hoping this is a good idea because I found it fun creating. But I've added to my email lectures and conversations stuff around workflow, building up workflows. And so if you're doing a larger class where you're including using, say, a HubSpot or another type platform that allows you to do landing pages along with emails and have a email drip campaign, this could be a great exercise. But if you want to stay away from all that, you can still do this exercise, and I think it's worthwhile. The goal is to show that most emails today go out in a functioning off of a workflow. And so what this allows you to do is think about the buyer's journey and buying behavior and tie it into the messaging you want to use to communicate and connect with your customers. And so you really just need to come up with a marketing goal, such as signing up for an event or generating a lead, provide a time frame, and provide some milestones and say, let's build this in PowerPoint and go and see what happens. So for example, the one that I'm running in my class right now is I created an event, like a conference event. And so you have 2 months to get people to sign up. And so they need to figure out the timing of the emails in that 2-month time period. They're told that there's a target of existing customers you're trying to market to. And the milestones, the key milestones that they have to map emails to are the starting email, what happens when someone sends an inquiry. One thing I actually left out here was a reminder, but also maybe an email that's specifically about learning about one of the speakers, and then an email to push for register. And then they have to create triggers so that if someone clicks on an email, what that person now has shown interest, what do they do with that person? And so this is a little exercise. You could do this in a platform like HubSpot or Klaviyo, but you could also simply do this in PowerPoint or Google Slides by creating a hierarchy and identifying the points. The key is to get some examples like the one I showed on the previous screen so that they have a model to go by. All right. Now, my final one. This is one that's, as someone who's taught marketing research for a lot of years too, in addition to digital marketing, this is my favorite, but it takes a little bit more to get into. And that is to show how to do an A/B test using an email. So I guess you could also use this in a marketing research class or in a basic stats class if you wanted to. The goal is to drive home the importance of understanding experimental design, what metrics actually tell you, and doing a little detective work. And so the fundamentals are you want to create an email with 2 subject lines, or you just tell people there's an email with 2 subject lines. However much detail you want to get into is really up to you. And then you want to provide some obvious and not so obvious clues, and then a little bit of data for them to play around with. So in this particular case, the example I'm going to show you is I give the students a backstory and I provide this amount of data to them. And they have to, from this data, calculate the open rate, which is just simply taking the number of emails opened divided by the number of emails sent. And then they have to calculate the click-through to open, or CTO rate, which now they take the click-throughs divided by the emails open. So in the case of A, it's taking 81 divided by 750. So they calculate these 2 things. And then if you really want to add in the stats, you give them away. There's lots of free calculators online where if you just plug in this information, you can get a p-value. And you can determine whether the differences across A and B are statistically significant enough. So here's where the story gets interesting. This is how the data works out. In this particular case, the longer subject line, which most people would tell you long is bad, but the longer subject line tends to have a higher open rate, and it's statistically significant, no matter which level you put this at. But if you look to the click-through to open, the click-through to open is lousy for the one that had the higher open rate. And this is, you don't even need a t-test to determine this. Now, ironically, this is actually based on a real story that one of my former students told me. They were working for a major company that I can't mention, but it's a major company that should be known better. In any case, if you ask students, which email should you go with, the longer and shorter, you're going to get a debate, because you'll have some people say, well, you should go with B because the open rate was bigger. And you'll have others that'll say, no. You need to go with the A because the click to open rate was bigger. And now this raises the question, which metric should I be paying attention to? And more importantly, why am I getting such different click to open rates when the content of the email should be exactly the same? The only difference here is the subject line. So this is where you want to remind students that the subject line affects the open rate. Because, and this, you can tie this back to your email accounting exercise. What got you to open an email? So you're looking at your phone or you're looking at your email app on your desktop and you see a subject line and you decide to open the email largely due to the subject line and maybe who it's from. But in terms of clicking on the content to a click-through to follow through, you're not doing that based on the subject line. You're doing that based on the content of the email. Sure, if the subject and the content line aren't aligned, if they're very different, then that's a different issue. But really, at the point you're clicking through, it's really based on the content of the email. So if the 2 groups are saying the same content, why are we getting such wildly different click-through rates? And so there's a lot to unpack here. Now, you can then take it to the next stage and give them more data. What actually happened in this story was that the company was not very careful about who they were sending the email to. So one group was filled with all IT people, and another group was filled with a mix of IT and marketing people. And so when you actually dig deeper, and I can share the numbers with you if you want to play with this, but you find out that if you then do a deeper dive, you can see that there are differences by who got the email. But you could stop right here. There's enough to unpack just in this conversation. In other words, which metric should I be using to decide whether my open rates are going to increase? And that's really the fundamental importance. And then the fact that there's a difference in the CTO should tell you that there's another problem that we need to do a deeper dive into. And you can stop right there. And that's a mouthful. So hopefully you've liked these. Let me just end with a little bit of sort of where these go and how to implement and some final thoughts. So I like to supplement readings, and I'm moving more, even I don't know how I'm teaching this fall quite yet. So I'm sure many of you are in the same boat. But for the last year or so, I've been trying to move more of my class, especially for my undergraduates, into a blended format where I give them things to read in advance that I would have done in class, and you try to spend the class on interactives. And so I might use wherever I can, like for example, I could easily take the email blast exercise where I'm showing my promotions and make that an asynchronous conversation. Whereas the case study with the A/B test or the workflow, I might want to do in person where I can have a discussion. Or have them start these exercises outside of class, and then the class is about the discussion of it. It's probably too much to do all 5 of these in a single week if you're only teaching 1 week of email marketing. If you have a larger class where it's a focus on CRM, or you want to take any of these ideas, you can obviously adapt these to other courses. That's great too. But I do believe that you can find the space for doing all of these in a mix of online or face-to-face. The bottom line is make it personal. The more that you can engage people and make it interesting based on the things that they know and some fun facts about you, you create a higher engagement. And this is going to be extremely important as we move more and more of our conversations to a distance learning format. Because that's what we're losing when we're not in the classroom with each other, is that personal flavor of, well, get to know me. I'm your teacher. Well, if we're just doing this on the screen, well, you just basically know me from here up. But adding in these little elements about email can, again, add in a little personal flair to make it personally you. And that ultimately will make this fun no matter which of these exercises you choose to use, or maybe you choose to use none of them. So with that in mind, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I think we finished a little bit early, but I'll turn it back to Bailey.
All right. Thank you so much, Rich. I'm not sure what happened, but my camera is not turning on. So if you guys have any questions for Rich, now would be the time to chat those in so that we can get those answered for you.
And I'm happy to share this deck. I'll talk to the gang at StuKent to figure out what's the best way to distribute it to everybody.
Yeah, we can definitely share that for you, Rich. Okay. If anyone doesn't have, or if everyone doesn't have any questions, then what we're going to do is there is a networking session right after this. So what we'll have you guys do is go back to the main page, and you are, oh, hang on. There are a couple questions that did come through. Give me just a sec.
Sure. Take your time. I got no place to go.
Okay. So Chris Boucher, I'm so sorry, I just butchered your last name. How do you get a customer back that has opted out or marked your email as junk?
Wow, that's tough. In a lot of cases, it means you have to get them back through some other alternative. If you won't really know, I mean, if marking as junk means they're basically not opening your email. So you're going to see that this particular email has not responded, and companies need to regularly clean out those emails. Just as an example, during this whole process of the shutdown and COVID-19, my wife and I have both been receiving emails from companies we haven't done business with in 5 or 6 years, including a restaurant that we visited on a trip. But suddenly they're emailing us saying, hey, here are all the different things we're doing. So I think you can't, if they have actually unsubscribed to you, then legally you can't email them back unless they somehow have given you their email or opted in and through some other process. If they're ultimately sending your email to junk, if they're an actual customer that you're doing business otherwise and you want to get them to pay attention to emails, you may have to reach out to them in another way, maybe send them a letter. But once a person has decided not to really look at your emails, it's really tough to turn them around. So you have to provide some other content, and they would have to opt in through another channel, like through a blog or through some other activity.
Awesome. Okay, so our next question is what are you considering short versus long subject lines and any particular number of words?
So my goal here is not to really give them a specific formula of what is considered long and what is considered short, because truthfully, for any company in any situation, that's actually what you want to A/B test. So there is no single, all right, don't exceed 5 words. I mean, 6 words really that much worse than 5? If you're limited to 3, can you really get your message out in 3 words? So this is why we do the A/B testing, is specifically to figure out exactly how long is too long and what is just right. So I'm sure that there are formulas out there, or there are companies that will tell you exactly the number of words, but I want to get away from that because I believe that also changes both over time and what industry you're in and what the nature of the event is. So that's why I try to be vague. And for purposes of this exercise, I do give them sort of join our conference. That's short, three words, versus come to the conference featuring XYZ and MNO as our speakers. That's the long one. And so really, it's you can either just simply say one is shorter and one is longer. Let's really talk about, it's really about the test and understanding what's affecting the different what actually affects the open rate, and less about the specific number of words or designing the optimal subject line. I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Okay, what's the minimum amount of time you'd have students do the Banana Republic activity?
Well, definitely that's something I would want them to prepare in advance of class if they're going to do it. And I think the goal is to have them do it like a presentation. So you get 5 minutes to just run through your 10 to your 30 days, and really the focus is on the spreadsheet. What are the big takeaways? Really the showing of the screenshots is really to create a story, so that it's more than just simply looking at a spreadsheet. But truthfully, the takeaways are the main takeaway is to show the discounting on a daily basis and whether that's effective or not, and the change in the subject lines. In the case of the Banana Republic one, I was able to show that they really didn't know if I was a guy or a girl, or maybe they didn't even care. So that was a nice element to the story. So you could have students essentially get up and do a 5-minute presentation, or maybe give them 5 minutes in a Zoom or WebEx chat to present what they had. But or I would do mine in advance and show them, and I wouldn't spend more than 10 minutes making my presentation, kind of like what we did today. And then I want to move it to the discussion of what are the implications of this, and what should we be thinking of. So how could we turn this into more of a drip campaign where we get, and what user data would we need to make this more personal, and how would we get that? I want to spend more time on those kind of things, and just use the exercise as a way to motivate it and make it a little bit more personal.
Awesome. Okay, and we'll do one last question. Oh, sorry, 2 last questions. What are the top 1 or 2 things students struggle with the most, and how do you address these issues?
Well, so it depends on the topic. I mean, I think that for thinking this is a boring topic, I think that the trivia is really a way to make it real, and then showing students the numbers, how much money is actually made by email and why it's effective. But in terms of the exercises that I showed you guys today, the A/B testing is by far the most difficult. In my particular case, I actually do a lecture. It's a asynchronous lecture, but I do an asynchronous lecture on the nature of experiments, what has to be in an experiment, and why you have to make sure that there's a direct relationship between the independent variable, in this case the subject line, and the dependent variable, which would be the open rate, so that I can come back to that and say, so look, you actually are not following your experimental design of what the different variables tell you and what you've set up here. So I would say that's the hardest part, is getting them to see that they really need to focus on that open rate. Now, the other aspect would be the statistics. If students are not comfortable with the statistics, maybe providing them the p-values, or making that simpler so that really it's just the interpretation they need and not having to worry about the calculation. Again, I have, because I've taught research for so many years, I have again, an asynchronous lecture that just explains the nature of what a p-value is. And then using a free tool online, you can just get it. So the ultimately is to say, yeah, there's a significant difference, and no, there isn't. I just need to make sure they know what that means when they say that.
Perfect. Okay, and we did have a follow-up question to the Banana Republic activity. How do you approach grading on this type of project? And do you have a rubric?
So for the Banana Republic one, I don't. That's one I just wanted to be an interactive that we're going to do in class. It's kind of a pass fail, more or less. Did you do it? Did you not? If you wanted to get into detail, it would be whether they properly evaluated their spreadsheet. But I think for this one, I don't want it to be a graded assignment. It's more for me to just motivate the conversation and for them to understand what's going on in these daily emails and what's the value of targeting. For the A/B test one, though, that one, the rubric is a little bit more clear. It's whether they got the numbers right and whether they're matching, whether they're making the decision on the subject line based on the open rate or whether they're making it on the click to open rate. And then bonuses for any guesses they have for why there's a difference in the CTOs when there shouldn't be.
That's great. Okay, so our last question is going to be, do you recommend HubSpot's email marketing certification, or is there a better alternative you'd recommend?
I don't know that there is an alternative. So I think that right now that's the only game in town that I'm aware of. And I like HubSpot's materials. I think that, my opinion about certifications is that each one, depending on which company, has its own pluses or minuses. I think at the end of the day, they are table stakes to get you into the conversation, but nothing replaces actually having more experience and having a conversation. So I think the benefit of the HubSpot certification is simply to get students to understand the language and hear about email marketing from a company that really specializes in that. And I think it's also a way to mix it up, especially if you're doing some form of distance learning. So it's not your voice all the time. So I think it's a good one and I highly recommend it. And they tend to have really good teaching materials, but the depth of any of these certifications is not going to be as good as the depth that you can get into with some of these topics. So it's worth it for you to take it so that you can see and then try to find ways to fill in the blanks with some of the exercises like this, so that you can add a little bit more color and they can see, well, all right, I'm getting excited by HubSpot, but I'm really getting to know this stuff by talking to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Rich, for your time and for your presentation. And we also want to give a big thank you to Heidi Rodier for being so active in the chat today. And we will be sending you your $5 gift card just for being so active and engaging. We also want to remind you that there is our networking activity for the next hour. And you will get to know other professors and get a talk for a little bit. So we'll just have you guys jump over into that next event. And thank you so much for coming to this breakout session.
Thank you, everybody. Good to see you all today.